Hello, everyone. How nice to see you all here. I asked this tremendously helpful, I guess he's interesting too, I don't know him very well, but anyway, helpful young man to dim the lights in the room because that's a sort of standard protocol for art historical lectures. The truth of the matter is that art historians are absolutely terrified of talking with the lights on. And every time I think about it, I don't think I would have the courage to climb up to the stage. So thank you for your indulgence of this rather twilight auditorium condition. Oh, the city of light. There it is, with a close-up at the bottom, of course, of the kind of the sort of talismanic emblem of the city of light at night, the Eiffel Tower equipped with its new on-the-hour crinkling light display. Everyone knows that's the nickname of the city of Paris. And everyone seems to think that the French capital acquired that moniker, in French, La Ville Lumière, based upon the abundance and beauty of its night lighting. Well, yes, but no. More on that in what follows. Right now, let's note that that old standby of an epithet has been morphing lately into a plural, especially in literature coming out of the travel industry, underscoring that strong belief that the name has to do with lighting and lights, quite literally, as in this whimsical photo collage by a contemporary artist. It cleverly imagines Paris as a realm of bulbs and lamps that glow, as you see, but without illuminating. We'll be harnessing Thomas Barbie's insights in due course. Let me first map out the big, capital B, art historical paradox that sits right at the center of this talk about art and light, by observing that the City of Light, in its 19th century glory days, was famously the headquarters of the Impressionist movement, spearheaded by those widely beloved and celebrated specialists in what? In light. For example, this 1878 canvas by Claude Monet, and this similar canvas really by his colleague Pierre-Auguste Renoir. Okay, a diverse phenomenon Impressionism was, but its core participants, including Renoir, let's look at that Monet again, and Monet, were certainly all focused on making newly truthful and direct records of what there was to see right in the Paris-based artists' immediate, largely metropolitan and suburban environments, and the new commitment to optical realism generated many, many canvases like these that instance the artist's fascination with the flux of natural light, of sunlight in nature, as well as illuminating parts of the fully urban built environment, as in the case of this Renoir of the Pont Neuf from 1872, and a picture that we in Chicago know well, one of the most popular pictures in the Art Institute of Chicago, Gustav Kaibat's 1877 Rainy Day. One of the things that I hope that you will already have noticed about the two paintings that I've shown you set within the city proper, where most of the material that actually get described in the picture are not products of nature, but products of human manipulation of the environment, you will already have noticed that these pictures are emphatically set during the daytime. Indeed, this is a detail from the Kaibat that we just saw. Indeed, Impressionist disinterest in the city outdoors at night appears explicitly, even somewhat mischievously, announced by Cailbat's prominent, ostentatiously unlit gas lamp. So I began one day, not too long ago, I began to scratch my head about this and to puzzle over this pattern of preference. And as I began to to puzzle myself over Impressionist city scenes all being set during the daytime, I at the same time happened to immerse myself in two very different, but as you'll see, closely connected discoveries. Discovery A. Please keep track. There are three discoveries they will be lettered. There will be discoveries A, B, and C. Okay. Discovery A. I found that there were outdoor Paris street and boulevard and even park nighttime pictures. Let's call them nocturnes. That's what they're referred to as. Anyway, nocturnes galore by American and other foreign artists in Paris. This is a prime example. You see Charles Courtney Curran's Paris by Night from 1886. One of the things that you might already be observing is that, the thing I want to underscore is that it's just exactly the kind of canvas you never get from the core, I'm going to call them indigenous Parisian painters of modern life, namely a view of the city bathed in artificial illumination. But you will also note that even though Curran's canvas is punctuated by all those artificial lights, it's weirdly dark. It remains weirdly dark. Lots of lights that don't seem to cast very much light. And this is not going to be at the center of what I say today, but it ends up being sort of important in the bigger scheme, namely that Curran and his colleagues, when they treat the city of light at night, it's all about gaslight, almost never about the new electric light. Let me show you another example. Here's a work by another American who spent time, a set of years, studying and painting the city, Childe Hassam, his Paris Nocturne from 1889. You can see the multiple artificial lighting technologies that actually animate the canvas. And one of the things that's maybe worth pointing out, you see this elegant stroller in the black dress. That one of the things that these American artists in Paris attracted to the city at night invent is a city of absolutely unscary and alluring and friendly and congenial sociability. As some people put it, for these visiting American artists, the world's most celebrated city of Eros is converted into a city of virtue. Anyway, I have a lot of these up my sleeve. I've just brought a couple of them to show you today. Another work, this one by Maurice Prendergast, who also features a solitary, altogether respectable female pedestrian on an evening street. And here's my last set of American in Paris examples. For Sargent, that most suave and fully cosmopolitan and well-assimilated expat American in Paris. These are very unusual canvases for him. Two views of the Luxembourg Garden in Paris at twilight, 1879. I should also tell you, we're coming up now on Discovery B. I realized that most of the same indigenous Parisian modernists or impressionists who neglected or forswore outdoor Paris at night, at the same time worked to represent some of the indoor worlds of the city at night, especially contexts of public institutions of entertainment, as you see here in this exceptionally complicated print. It's a lithograph by Edgar Duga, who includes 3 different kinds of nighttime illumination, and indeed one could even enumerate 4 if you counted the streams coming down in the sky, which actually index a fireworks display going on in the background. Another artist whose works deserve to be seen in this way is the work of the American in Paris, Mary Cassatt. This is one of her theater interior works on paper that she actually showed during her debut in an Impressionist exhibition in 1879. It's very characteristic of her works along these lines to feature not only a somewhat anxious theater goer, usually female, but also a gigantic, dazzling, indeed blazing light fixture, in this case that great big gas chandelier. And in order to underscore how dazzling it was, she even used metallic paint on that portion of the picture. When we're thinking about these things in this context, a very familiar picture indeed. This is one of these pictures. I'll bet a lot of you have seen this before. It's a very sort of much admired and very, very frequently reproduced picture. It's Edgar Monet's last public painting, a bar at the Folies Bergère, painted in 81. Because I work on the 19th century, I have a tendency not to identify the century, and I'm always talking about dates like, well, you know, in 76, in late 78, and then sometimes I realize people don't know what century I'm talking about. I apologize for that, but, you know, 99 times out of 100, I'm talking about the 19th century. Anyway, 1881, and this well-known and widely discussed painting is usually considered to be a kind of a summa of the Impressionist interest in representing the newly technologized, light-saturated, glaring nightclub interiors of this day in Paris. So a project began to take shape for me around what I've just come up with a syndrome. I thought it up today. I realized that I was increasingly gripped by art historical heliophobia. Art historical heliophobia, which is to say I'd had enough of that stinking sunlight. I was only interested in artificial light. So as I developed a deepening case of heliophobia, my interest also began to burgeon in really tracking the divergent ways that the spaces of the City of Light were imagined bathed in artificial light during a particular era. And my definition of that era ended up being, here it comes, Discovery C. That this very era was an era when lighting technologies were changing very, very fast. And indeed, discussions of lamps and lighting and wires and lighting technologies were on everybody's tongue. I mean, in some way, well, I don't want to be anachronistic and talk about iPhones and so on, but everyone couldn't shut up about lighting technologies during these years in Paris. And I was fascinated to discover, I'm still looking at this famous work by Monet. You don't have to look very far in the art historical evidence to discover traces of this culture-wide preoccupation with lighting. The word in French is éclairage, that really distinguishes it from light, which is a completely different kind of word. So it's the difference between lumière, light, and lighting, éclairage. Anyway, that preoccupation developed with increasing intensity from about 1878. You'll be finding out before I'm done why it was 1878. Anyway, I came across a critical, wow. Never mind that, those snuck in, that's about something else. Anyway, I came across a bit of evidence that really suggests to us in a big hurry that painters were held to a very high standard of depictive accuracy when it came to the new lights. This piece of evidence is a weird and little-studied piece of criticism. Don't worry, you don't have to work your way through this French thing. I had a go at translating it, and here it is. This is Jacques Huysmans, a very influential critic in these years. He'd seen Monet's bellwether canvas in a big public exhibition that the French called the Salon, in close to the very end of his life in 1882. And he published this thing saying, but the subject is thoroughly modern, and Monsieur Monet's idea to put his favorite female figure in her own milieu is ingenious. But what does this lighting mean? That, he says, that's gaslight? And electric light? Come on. This painting is a hazy plein air, the word that's used for something being done out of doors, in the daytime, from the motif. A bath, just a bath, he says, of pale daylight. From that, everything collapses. The Folie Bergère could exist and only exists in the evening. Thus understood and sophisticated, the club is absurd. It's truly deplorable to see a man of Monsieur Monet's worth sacrifice his art by such subterfuges and make paintings that are as conventional as those by others. Well, that struck me as an exceptionally weird and surprising and vivid reaction to the painting. It's not a sort of frame that is usually put around Monet, whether or not he was capable of actually describing the appearance of the effects of simultaneously deployed lighting technologies. And one of the things that's also striking about this weird piece of art criticism is that Huysmans actually implies that by actually honing in and getting it right and really showing what the new lights look like, that would be a kind of a radical achievement which Monet is avoiding here and instead lining up with more conventional painters. It's a surprising and fascinating thing. So Discovery A met up with Discovery B and crashed into Discovery C, and I realized, back to the beautiful city of light, I realized that a lot more work needed to be done historicizing the nickname of the city itself. It was time for a very intense interrogation of the historical status of this term, the City of Light. Now, I'll confess that I worked a little bit on this when I wrote about the engulfing of the City of Light in darkness during the Prussian siege of Paris. It's a fairly arcane subject, but one dear to my heart. The Prussian siege of Paris in 1870-71, in a book I published that Bobby mentioned in 2002, you can see that that temporary casting of the city into darkness produced lots of caricatural jokes, and as usual, women trying to show themselves off. There's nothing funnier than that, is there? And attractive women out in the public sphere are often butts of jokes. In this case, when the gas was turned off in the city, channeled as it necessarily had to be toward military purposes, most importantly supplying a brigade of hot air balloons, these young women are shown carrying a candle and an oil lamp out of their households in order to still show themselves off on the street. The fairer sex making sure they let themselves be seen in the evening on the boulevard. So they will always find a way to make their beauty apparent out in public. So I decided to dive in when all of these pieces of this puzzle presented themselves to me. And this means that I can finally disclose to you a key morsel of information that I have been withholding. Here it comes. The French capital has actually been known as La Ville Lumière since the 18th century, and it had nothing to do with light, with lighting. It acquired that epithet through its prominence in, you know what I'm going to say, the Enlightenment. But the nickname as metaphor, it was a metaphor, acquired a descriptive valence when no one was paying attention, I think, in the 19th century glory days of Parisian gaslight. Those were the decades of the 1840s and 1850s, as its signature brightly lit boulevards and illuminated glass shops and cafes proliferated for the first time. It was only in those years that the city was actually associated with lighting and not merely enlightenment. As the great historian of the night, you'd be surprised how many specialists there are in histories of the night. I have a 43-page bibliography if you're having trouble sleeping. As the historian of the night, Joachim Schlor explains, it was only with the provision of gaslight in those decades that the nocturnal city and the concept of nightlife emerged as sociological categories. The artificial light that bathed the most prosperous quarters of the capital city helped indeed to foster the city's burgeoning reputation as the cafe of Europe and the eventual so-called capital of the 19th century. Light came to be seen as one of the most precious commodities and hallmarks of the city. The brilliantly glowing city conveyed a double promise of excitement on the one hand and the reassurance of security on the other, allowing night to acquire its modern identity, right, as a time of additional work, public entertainment, and association and education. But the association between artificial illumination and leisure constituted the strongest bond in the 19th century imagination, especially in and apropos Paris. So, although Paris was indelibly linked to abundant gaslight, and it still is, oddly enough, it remains in many ways frozen in the tourist mind and in tourist literature in its gaslit Belle Epoque moment and incarnation. But never mind, despite that linkage, that long-standing linkage with gaslight, it was, in fact, one of the first cities on Earth to experiment with the newest forms of highly technologized outdoor light, namely electric arc lighting, the kind of electric light that preceded the emergence and perfection of incandescent light, which we'll hear about momentarily. Some of you who know Paris know that there's a rather central space in the city called the Place de la Concorde. And in fact, that space was lit by blinding, enormous experimental arc lights as early as 1844, and you're going to be able to use this at the next party that you go to. It was the first such urban space to be illuminated by electricity anywhere on Earth. Some 30 years later, the years that really interest me, namely those years between 1878 and 1881, arc lamps of various brands and technologies began to appear in highly prominent urban sites, and they grabbed all the headlines. What you see here, this is a wood engraving that was used as an illustration in a very influential technical paper called, what else? Electric Light. This shows sort of like lollipops up the sidewalk, the implantation of rows of the new arc lighting called Jablokov candles. This was the leading technology of the day. They were put in place experimentally in 1877, and then the lease was renewed. But in these years, and it's something that, that I'm obsessed with and we just don't hear very much about, it was in these years that there were very experimental and much discussed and widely detested forms of experimental electric light put in place all over the city. This, in fact, represented the installation of these experimental lights on the Boulevard des Italiens, one of the grand boulevards of central Paris, It didn't stay there very long. Again, a wood engraving used to illustrate the implantation of this technology in the same journal. And you can see that the illustrator included the presence of a parasol down below being used to protect people from this monstrous light. It was often called a monster light. There was much anxiety about not just in other words, when these lights were installed, they were not seen in terms of enhanced illumination and visibility. They were seen in terms of having introduced dazzlement and blindness, just exactly what presumably you don't want from enhanced, updated electric illumination. And, you know, all over town. There were, in fact, these arc lights were in some cases used on interiors, especially commercial interiors. Here they are deployed in a great big department store in the Magasin du Louvre. And here they are in the Place du Carrousel, right adjoining the Louvre Museum. So, but the big news is suggested by another illustration from a weekly Parisian periodical. This is illustration. And that's a big event in which this kind of light fever sort of culminated, namely the International Electrical Exhibition. I'll bet you've never even heard about this. How impoverished your otherwise rich lives are. The first ever International Electrical Exhibition, long awaited, was held in 1881 in Paris. The decision was taken that Paris was the place to house it, and it was held in the Palace of Industry, which the interior of which you see on the screen now, which had been built in 1855. This exhibition, it ran for 3.5 months, from August through November, established Paris, albeit very briefly, as the world capital of electricity, while its displays established the commercial dominance of the American Thomas Edison's incandescent electric light system, whose extremely famous, very quickly famous, perfected bulb had already been announced in the United States in late 1879. We all remember, don't we, that late December display in New Jersey at the end of December 1879. So the greatest transatlantic technology transfer of the era was underway. And it was conjoined to Edison's accelerating hubris and celebrity status in not just in certain electricity-obsessed corners of Paris, but all over the place in the popular press. Listen to this quotation from a piece that appeared in the August 23, 1881 issue of the New York Times. The lighting display, Mr. Edison thinks, will be particularly interesting to Parisians, inasmuch as he has secured a license from the municipality of Paris to light up one section of the city, and he thinks that he will be enabled from this exhibition to form a company for the lighting of the whole city, end quote. Here is a collage which includes in the upper right-hand corner a photograph of his the Edison display in the Palace of Industry. Here's another view in the Palace of Industry. These are the banners that hung in his hometown in Milan, Ohio at the turn of the millennium. You can see I've become somewhat obsessed with Edison. I made a pilgrimage to his birthplace. Anyway, Edison's boasting was not just boasting. He did make, indeed, come back to that, he did make inroads, and indeed he received a contract to illuminate the interior of the Paris Opera, which you see here, already filled. I hope you can read the caption there. The foyer of the Paris Opera illuminated by Edison lamps. The new lighting mania in the French sphere, I'm showing you without the time to sort of parse and go over each one of these things, but this is a journal obviously completely consecrated to the publishing of caricatures. It's called The Caricature. caricaturists just couldn't stop coming up with jokes that issued from the presence of the International Electricity Exhibition in Paris. It gave an opportunity to make, for example, endless jokes. Maybe we still make jokes like that about electricity and sex, you know, believing that women who actually went through the turnstile became sort of erotically supercharged thanks to the display of all that electricity. There were even opportunities then because Edison became sort of a star overnight when his display was considered to be the most, there it is again, the most remarkable. There was even an opportunity in some cases to associate the erotic charge of electricity with the complicated process in Paris of Americanization. Anyway, the new lighting mania in the French sphere, there were also at the same time American, British, and German forms, but it sort of reached fever pitch in the city of Paris, was very much reflected by the arrival on the scene of all these specialist newspapers, part of the energetic, indeed nationalist, and very vituperative reaction to the rise of Thomas Edison. It all began when he made a boasting announcement as early as September 1878 in faraway New Jersey, saying, "I have let the other inventors get the start on me in this matter somewhat because I have not given much attention to electric lights, but I believe I can catch up to them now," end quote. In a nutshell then, from the moment that various kinds of electric light began to be bruited and then to actually coexist and compete with gaslight out of doors, and then with candles and oil lamps as well as gaslight in people's homes, Paris became obsessed with lighting. Its aesthetic, moral, social, technical, and physical properties. Let's look at that caricature while I'm telling you a few more things. The heyday of illumination discourse had arrived, or rather the citywide awareness of and preoccupation with new kinds of technologist light fostered the emergence of what the experts call an incipient light cult, which encompassed, as I've already implied, aesthetic opinions and technical knowledge, as well as social concerns and physiological and psychological anxieties. So as you can tell, my work on this project sort of takes root right in the middle of all this by arguing that all of this had a hitherto unacknowledged impact on the way that Paris was seen in the transatlantic visual arts of the period. Now, something that I can't really, my slides have all moved around all by themselves. I've never had this happen before. It's you know, Steve Jobs is sad when we use this kind of technology instead of MacBooks. And this technology moved my slides around. Isn't that easier than having to take responsibility for it myself? Let's go back to the glaring lights on the Avenue de l'Opéra and the Avenue of the Opera, in order for me to say to you very quickly that I want to make a case for this showing up and leaving its mark in artworks, visual culture properly speaking, and in all kinds of writings that had to do with artworks. But it also showed up, obviously, in texts that ran from the sociological to the poetic, if I can make that sort of sketch out a broad spectrum. And maybe no text from these excitable years illustrates the strong passions stirred by the new light better than a piece written by Robert Louis Stevenson in 1878. Surely one of the great screeds ever published against electric Paris. It was entitled "A Plea for Gas Lamps," and he's responding exactly to what you see here and other kinds of implantations of these monster lamps all over the city in these years. Stevenson writes, "The word electricity now sounds the note of danger. In Paris, at the mouth of the Passage des Princes, in the Place before the Opera portico, and in in the Rue Drouot at the Figaro office. A new sort of urban star now shines out nightly, horrible, unearthly, obnoxious to the human eye, a lamp for a nightmare. Such a light as this should shine only on murders and public crime, or along the corridors of lunatic asylums, a horror to heighten horror. That ugly, blinding glare may not improperly advertise the home of slanderous Figaro. That's a newspaper that he mentioned as housing this new electricity that he didn't like. Anyway, the slanderous Figaro, but where soft joys prevail, where people are convoked to pleasure, and the philosopher looks on, smiling and silent, where love and laughter and deifying wine abound, there at least let the old mild luster shine upon the ways of man, end quote. Such sentiments provided rich material for caricaturists, including my own favorite who worked under the pen name Sham, as well as I've already indicated, painters and printmakers. This adorable caricature, which appears in 1880, just when the battle is still very fresh and still being fought about these jarring new lights. The caption says, "The moon re-silvering herself to appear just as brilliant as the light of Monsieur Jablokov." So I thought against that background, we could look at one of these sergeants again that I showed very quickly when I was giving you the lineup, and seeing if looked at against the backdrop of the sketch I've just offered of the rise and topicality of new lighting technologies, all during the heyday of what I call Illumination Discourse. If against that backdrop, certain of Sargent's thematic choices and aesthetic moves might just acquire some new interest, maybe even some new significance. Okay. Now, maybe the first thing to point out is the number of lighting technologies that Sargent actually puts together in this picture. Number one, it's twilight, so the fading light of the sun. Number two, it's moonrise, the moon, the light of the moon, and this very strong dazzle of reflected moonlight on the boat pond. That's three. If you can see, let's see. Just poking through the trees there at the edge of the park, you can see the orange of gas lights on the boulevard twinkling through. And finally, a little bit hard to see in this somewhat unfortunate, somewhat pixelated reproduction, you can see the glowing orange end of the cigarette smoked by the suave fellow, the male half of the couple moving through the park. Okay, now why on earth is that interesting? Well, one of the reasons it's interesting is taking into consideration where this painting is sitting, where this painting was set, vis-a-vis all this stuff that I've been talking about. This painting is set looking east, and the little gas lights, those little spots of orange that come through the greenery, are coming through the Boulevard Saint-Michel and the Rue de Médicis. You see those streets on the east edge of the park? Those are very recently built streets. That's an artifact of the rebuilding of the city in the 1860s. The park was cut down to size. A lot of it was disposed of. People protested. People marched. It was considered to be one of the worst things that ever happened. So those lights that twinkle through are some very controversial little twinkles of controversial urban modernity. But the other thing that really interests me, and we have to look at this airplane shot in order to be able to see it, is that beyond this location, up up the street there, that's the Rue Soufflot that goes up to the Pantheon, the dome of which you can see in Sargent's picture. And guess what I found out? 2 months before he decided to do these two canvases, let's look at the canvas again now. Guess what was planted on the Rue Soufflot? You got it. 2 rows of Jablochkoff candles of the most glaring and problematic sort. So I began thinking, he decides to set a painting in the Luxembourg Gardens looking east toward the Panthéon, featuring all these various simultaneous, very congenial, very affably combined light effects, just when those arc lights are blaring up the street. And then I started looking at this actual rather strong bedazzlement of reflection on that boat pond, and I began to, on the boat basin, and it began to sort of acquire another significance for me. This is provisional, but I don't think it's bad. Maybe we can see the hyper-dazzle on the boat basin as a kind of artistic struggle, a sort of an alternative way to capture that the modernity of the monster dazzle just down the street, in this case displaced into the sphere of the moon competing with the lamps. It's just like Chom's caricature. It is, in fact, the moon resilvering itself in order to be just as brilliant and bright as the monster lamps just up the street. The final image that I'm going to show you this afternoon, I hope will point in the direction, will sort of suggest the many other categories of Parisian visual culture that await that await illumination via knowledge of and curiosity about lighting and lamps and the related discourses in these years. You can see that I'm showing you a work by Mary Cassatt, and it certainly strikes a note apart from the kind of pictures I've been showing you. It's an interior, right? And in fact, it's set inside the artist's own apartment, in the library in her own apartment, and as you can see, 2 women share the space with 1 lamp in the middle. I put together a kind of a little collage in order to advance this compressed case that I want to make about it. What you see glowing in the lower right-hand corner is a photograph of a friend of mine's moderator lamp, which happens to be the kind of lamp that is used as the model for this highly stylized and edited lamp in the middle. And what you see in the upper right corner, that's a close-up of none other than one of those nasty, much argued over Jablochkoff candles in its pure round globeness. And you saw that every time one of those illustrators decided to represent the city newly infested, lit by those new kinds of arc lights, the actual globe was shown in that reduced circular shape. You will have already been struck by the quiet coexistence of those 2 figures in this muted interior. The muted monochromatic tones, in fact, in my opinion, emphasize the blazing contemporaneity of Cassatt's rendering of a lamp globe that glows like the moon and like an arc light, but fails to shed light on its surroundings, very much like the light bulbs in that photo collage by Thomas Barbie that I showed you right at the start of my talk. Like the problematic arc lamps denounced so memorably by Stevenson, Cassatt's lamp also dazzles and does not illuminate. I think it resembles a lighthouse for a parlor. I would argue that Mary Cassatt's close scrutiny of the news-making light environment out in the street beyond her own apartment was displaced metaphorically to a domestic interior lighting scenario that she knew intimately. I think that there's more than just this etching. There's a whole group of these. I think that her oddly unlit, indeed gloomy interiors overseen by these glaring light globes really should be understood as displaced evocations of the controversial blaze out on the boulevards. One of the things that would have to be argued for here, which I need not to go into enormous detail about, is if you see this beautiful glowing moderator lamp down in the lower right-hand corner, you'll see that one of the moves that Mary Cassatt made in her representation of exactly the same kind of lamp, the body is a slightly different shape, is that she sawed off the chimney on the top of the lamp. You can't have an oil lamp like that function without a chimney sticking out. So that in her likening the globe of her stylish moderator lamp to the globe of an arc light outside, she successfully, well, you could say she decapitated the lamp. I think that's not quite right. But she, in other cases, she customized it and eliminated the chimney in order to get that glowing orb to resemble the controversial globes out in the street. So what I would want to make a case for was that when Mary Cassatt tackled light in these prints versus lighting, in her very first intensive printmaking campaign, all the prints were black and white, and they coincided exactly with the years of the pitched interest in and battle over the new lights in the street. All of her prints were made between 1879 and 1882. I would make a case for her luminophilia being splintered by luminophobia. Or rather, the engagement staged by the prince was an intimate union with an old-fashioned and elegant apartment interior that was also a hostile encounter, manifest in her use of a surrogate lamp for a nightmare. Okay, I'm going to stop there and say thank you very much indeed.